Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever episode of Reading and Weeping. My name is Julia, and I am your host. And in this podcast, I just kind of want to talk about reading, doing book reviews, all of those things, because 2022 for me was the year of getting back into reading. Before this year, I had not read an entire book since I was probably like 12. So, in high school, I was very much a Spark Notes girl. I didn't really take the time to read a lot of stuff. But this year, that's all kind of changed once I kind of started looking at reading as like a fun thing that can be entertaining that you can do in your free time. So that has really been transformative for me over this year, and I thought it would be a good idea to just go through the best books that I've read this year and the worst, to show you what's worth it to read, what's not worth it to read if you're somebody who is just trying to get back into reading like I am. So yeah, let's just get right into it. I got no time to waste. So, a disclaimer as well, not all of these books came out this year. Only a few of them did. But these are I'm very new to reading, like I said. So this is a lot of books that may have been popular for a while. And also they're not in any particular order. The best and the worst ones, they're not in any particular order. They're just overall my favorites and least favorites from the year. So let's start off with one of the first books that I read, which is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I'm going to start off with a little synopsis to give you guys a little bit of a taste of what it's about. So, in this exhilarating novel by the best-selling author of The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery, two friends, often in love but never lovers, come together as creative partners in the world of video game design, where success brings them fame, joy, tragedy, duplicity, and ultimately a kind of immortality. On a bitter cold day in the December of his junior year at Harvard, Sam Masser, I think that's how you say it, exits a subway car and sees amid the hordes of people waiting on the platform Sadie Green. He calls her name. For a moment, she pretends she hasn't heard him, but then she turns and a game begins, a legendary collaboration that will launch them to stardom. These friends, intimate since childhood, borrow money, beg favors, and before even graduating college, they have created their first blockbuster, Ichigo. I think that's what it's called. That's how I read it in my mind. Overnight, the world is theirs. Not even 25 years old, Sam and Sadie are brilliant, successful, and rich, but these qualities won't protect them from their own creative ambitions or the betrayals of their hearts. Spanning 30 years from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Venice Beach, California, and lands in between and far beyond, Gabrielle Zevin's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a dazzling and intricately imagined novel that examines the multifarious nature of identity, disability, failure, the redemptive possibilities in play, and above all, our need to connect, to be loved, and to love. Yes, it is a love story, but it is not the one you have read before. That's a great synopsis of this book. It's very long. It's very descriptive. I've heard that this book is going to be turned into a movie. I don't agree with that. I think it should be turned into a miniseries. But this book is honestly so beautiful and heartbreaking and funny, and you really just root for these characters that are in this book. They go through a lot. Like it said, it's over 30 years. They go through a lot, and you kind of see how their relationships shift, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful book. I was intrigued to read this book because I read Elsewhere by Gabrielle Zevin, which is like a children's novel. I read that when I was younger, and I absolutely loved it. It's still one of my favorite books of all time. I don't care if it's written for kids. It's so, so good. So I was so excited to read this. And of course, she didn't let me down. She's amazing. She's like literally my favorite author. I love her so much. So I highly, highly recommend this book. It's so, so beautiful in so many ways. And it was easily one of my favorites of 2022. Now, the second book that I absolutely loved this year is a Reese's Book Club pick. If you don't know Reese's Book Club, it's Reese Witherspoon's book club. This was one of her picks. And I read the synopsis of it and I was so intrigued. And it really didn't let me down. So I'm going to read it for you. So here's the synopsis. Can you stop a murder after it's already happened? Late October, after midnight. You're waiting up for your 17-year-old son. He's late. As you watch from the window, he emerges, and you realize he isn't alone. He's walking toward a man, and he's armed. You can't believe it when you see him do it. Your funny, happy teenage son. He kills a stranger right there on the street outside your window. You don't know who, you don't know why. You only know your son is now in custody, his future shattered. That night you fall asleep in despair. All is lost until you wake, and it is yesterday. And then you wake again, and it is the day before yesterday. Every morning you wake up a day earlier, another day before the murder, with another chance to stop it. Somewhere in the past lies an answer, the trigger for this crime, and you don't have a choice but to find it. Now, this book started out a little bit slow. I'm not going to lie. You know, she wakes up the day before the murder happens and she's kind of like freaking out, taking it all in. But honestly, that length of time where she kind of has to figure everything out, it ends up being really, really necessary because the story kind of picks up from there. You keep jumping through time and she finds out so much that she didn't know about not only her son, but her family. And it ends up being this like crazy mystery story, murder mystery, I guess you could say. But it's so, it has like a time travel element in it, which is like, it's nothing like I've ever read before where it kind of goes back in time in this way. And it's also told from another perspective as well. There's this perspective of her and then the perspective of somebody else. I'm not going to give that away because that will give something away. But this book has like so many different twists and turns in it that it's just going to keep you reading once you kind of get past that long beginning. It's a really, really incredible read and I highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so the third book that I read this year that really, really surprised me is a classic novel, not written in 2022. And it was a book that I tried to read in high school, but I never really got past like the first 100 pages. And that book is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I made it my mission that I was going to finish this book because I enjoyed it so much when I was in high school, but it felt so much like the homework assignments that were on top of it. It was just like, okay, well, I don't want to like be reading and enjoying this book and then going and looking for stuff that should be that I have to know for a test, you know? So this was a book that I never really finished, but I made it my mission when I started reading again. I was like, I have to finish East of Eden by John Steinbeck. If I'm going to read any classic, it has to be this one because it truly was really good. I'm going to read you the synopsis. It's going to kind of sound boring, I feel like. I haven't read the synopsis in a while, but I feel like it's going to sound a lot more boring than the book truly is. But here we go. In his journal, Nobel Prize winner John Steinbeck called East of Eden the first book, quote unquote, and it has been the primordial power and simplicity of myth. Set in the rich farmland of California's Salinas Valley, this sprawling and often brutal novel follows the intertwined destinies of two families, the Trasks and the Hamiltons, whose generations helplessly reenact the fall of Adam and Eve and the poisonous rivalry of Cain and Abel. Adam Trask comes to California from the east to farm and raise his family on the new rich land. But the birth of his twins, Cal and Aaron, brings his wife to the brink of madness, and Adam is left alone to raise his boys to manhood. One boy thrives, nurtured by the love of all those around him. The other grows up in loneliness, enveloped by a mysterious darkness. First published in 1952, East of Eden is the work in which Steinbeck created his most mesmerizing characters and explored his most enduring themes: the mystery of identity, the inexplicability of love, and the murderous consequences of love's absence. A masterpiece of Steinbeck's years later, East of Eden is a powerful and vastly ambitious novel that is at once a family saga and a modern retelling of the book of Genesis. So I don't necessarily think that that is the best synopsis of this book. Granted, it is like 600 pages, so it's kind of a lot to fit into a synopsis, but I think that this book had like crazy drama in it. I'm going to do an entire episode on this book alone because I think that this book needs a modern adaptation, and I don't love adaptations. I don't love like remakes and reboots and biopics and stuff. I don't love those, but I think East of Eden needs like a mini series. It needs it. They did a movie back in the day with James Dean. I didn't see it, but there's just so much in this book that is so like rich in content, and it makes you cry, it pisses you off, like it invokes like visceral reactions from you when you're reading it. You get like so passionate about this book, and you know, Kathy is the greatest villain ever written, in my opinion. Like, I love the way that like she's written and how her family kind of like reacts to her, and how the story kind of moves along in that sense. I will say the Hamiltons are John Steinbeck's family, like in real life. So he kind of writes about his own family in it. And there's a lot of times where that can kind of seem pretty dull. But if you stick with those parts of the story and you stick with the introductions of his family in the beginning and see kind of how they're interwoven throughout the story, it does all end up making sense and his family kind of ends up being like a device for the Trasks to kind of like move forward in their lives. So they are very important to the story, but it can seem very boring. Once you get past the long introductions of both families, the book starts to get really, really, really good. It's a bit difficult to read because the font is so small and there's so many pages that it can kind of seem like I'm never going to get through this, but the story just ends up being so incredible that you stick to it. I finished this book in a week. I was so surprised with myself. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that because of how long it took me to read 100 pages in high school. So I love it. I absolutely love this book. I definitely recommend reading it if you're thinking of reading like anything like classic. I mean, I guess it's not really a classic because it's not like Jane Austen or something like that, but I still think it is. I think John Steinbeck's books are classics. So I would consider this one of those. And I highly, highly recommend it. It's worth the read. It's very long, but it's so worth it. I'm literally about to get Tim Shell tattooed on myself somewhere, I swear. I still think about this book all the time. It's incredible. I loved it. Please read it. Now, switching gears to another book that I got from the internet. It's extremely, extremely popular and for good reason. And that book is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm going to read you the synopsis, and you are going to want to read this. I'm telling you right now. Okay. Aging and reclusive Hollywood movie icon Evelyn Hugo is finally ready to tell the truth about her glamorous and scandalous life. But when she chooses unknown magazine reporter Monique Grant for the job, no one is more astounded than Monique herself. Why her? Why now? Monique is not exactly on top of the world. Her husband has left her, and her professional life is going nowhere. Regardless of why Evelyn has selected her to write her biography, Monique is determined to use this opportunity to jumpstart her career. Summoned to Evelyn's luxurious apartment, Monique listens in fascination to as the actress tells her story. From making her way to Los Angeles in the 1950s to her decision to leave show business in the 80s and, of course, the 7 husbands along the way, Evelyn unspools a tale of ruthless ambition, unexpected friendship, and a great forbidden love. Monique begins to feel a very real connection to the legendary star, but as Evelyn's story nears its conclusion, it becomes clear that her life intersects with Monique's own in tragic and irreversible ways. Now, listen, that synopsis truly does sum it up, and it gets crazy. These tragic and irreversible ways, that is like a major plot twist that literally nobody talks about when they talk about this book, and it's so crazy and it's so important to this story. It's so important, and you literally do not see it coming at all. At least I didn't see it coming. There was no way. But also on TikTok, everybody was always saying, I wish I could read Evelyn Hugo again for the first time. And I'm like, why? Like, what is so special about this book? When you learn what you learn in that book, you start seeing throughout the book, like everywhere that it was like kind of hinted. In my opinion, I think you do. And you can't get that feeling back of truly when you first read it. So that shocked me. It was so beautiful as well. Like the plot twist ends up being like crazy, but then it ends up being healing and just beautiful. It can make you cry if you're in a vulnerable mood. I cried. I was in a vulnerable mood. When I think about it, I cry. But this book is just incredible. I highly, highly recommend that you read it. I'm very excited to read Daisy Jones and the Six next, because Taylor Jenkins Reid does this thing where she kind of like weaves the world of these characters together in different books. So it's kind of like a multiverse, or like a Taylor Jenkins Reid universe, like a Marvel universe kind of. It's brilliant, honestly. So yeah, go out and read this book. If you're very new to reading, like you're just getting back into it, this is a great book to start out with because it's so, so good. You won't be able to put it down. So I think those are all of the books that I will say were the best books I read from this year. Some honorable mentions are definitely the Inheritance Games and the series with the Hawthorne Legacy and the Final Gambit. The Final Gambit did come out this year. Those were great. I didn't love the ending of the Final Gambit, but I know that there's going to be more with the Brothers Hawthorne that I think is going to come out next year. Those books are super entertaining if you love like a mystery and like riddles and stuff. I love it. I really do. So those are my honorable mentions, but I think it is time that we get into the worst books of the year that I've read. There are a couple, there's not a lot. But I thought I would point them out because, in my opinion, you should avoid them. So let's get into it. Now, if you have been on Book Talk at all, you would know that Colleen Hoover is literally everywhere. She rules that subsection of the app. People love her. People love her books. I haven't really fully formed an opinion on what I think of her, but this book that I'm about to mention really like lowered my opinion of her and her writing a lot. And that book is Ugly Love. Now, there are so many people who love this book. It's still in like the top 5 on the bestseller list. I'm just going to read you the synopsis. So when Tate Collins meets an airline pilot, Miles Archer, she knows it isn't love at first sight. They wouldn't even go so far as to consider themselves friends. The only thing Tate and Miles have in common is an undeniable mutual attraction. Once their desires are out in the open, they realize they have the perfect setup. He doesn't want love, she doesn't have time for love, so that just leaves the sex. Their arrangement could be surprisingly seamless as long as Tate can stick to the only 2 rules Miles has for her. Never ask about the past, don't expect a future. They think they can handle it, but realize almost immediately they can't handle it at all. Hearts get infiltrated, promises get broken, rules get shattered, love gets ugly. This is a gross misrepresentation of this book. I don't think it should be called ugly love. I think it should be called toxic love. Tate and Miles are terrible for each other. He has these weird rules where he says don't ask about the past and don't expect a future. She'll ask like little questions like, oh, like what was your favorite candy when you were a kid? And he's like, I told you not to ask about my past. Like he's so like damaged, and you kind of realize, you end up learning why he is, but it also sort of ends up being predictable. Like there's no twist in there that kind of like shocks you, and they are honestly toxic for each other. The Colleen Hoover knows how to write a good sex scene, I won't lie, she really does, but in this book there is a point where he says, where they are having sex and he says his ex-girlfriend's name. And it's like, what? And then after that, she starts crying and she says, finish. And then they finish. And it's like so beyond toxic. It is not ugly love. It's toxic love. It's absolutely terrible. And I hate it. I gave it a 1 star. It's so bad. If you are going to start with any Colleen Hoover book, start with literally any other book than this one. This is not a good book. I don't understand how it's constantly in the New York Times bestseller list, because it's probably the worst book I've ever read in my life. I don't hate Colleen Hoover. There have been books by her that I have read this year that I've liked. I sort of liked Verity up until the end. I didn't really love the ending, but Reminders of Him was so good. Reminders of Him is literally incredible. If you're going to read any Colleen Hoover book at all, read that one. Don't read Ugly Love. It is just a terrible, terrible book. They're a toxic couple, and I don't even know how 14-year-olds are getting their hands on this book, because then they think that this kind of relationship is okay, where you're just always toxic towards each other. It's just, I can't say enough bad things about this book, so I'm just going to move on and tell you another book that I didn't like. But this next book that I didn't like is nowhere near as much as I hate Ugly Love. So that was just, I needed to get that out to talk about the next book, which is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I know that I just talked really, really highly of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo because it's literally fantastic. Malibu Rising, on the other hand, it's what really got me on this one is the synopsis. So I'm going to read you the synopsis right now. 4 famous siblings throw an epic party to celebrate the end of summer, but over the course of 24 hours, their lives will change forever. Malibu, August 1983. It's the day of Nina Riva's annual end of summer party, and the anticipation is at a fever pitch. Everyone wants to be around the famous Rivas. Nina, the talented surfer and supermodel, brothers Jay and Hud, one a championship surfer, the other a renowned photographer, and their adored baby sister, Kit. Together, the siblings are a source of fascination in Malibu and the world over, especially as the offspring of the legendary singer, Mick Riva. The one person not looking forward to the party of the year is Nina herself, who never wanted to be the center of attention, and who has also just been very publicly abandoned by her pro tennis player husband. Oh, and maybe Hud, because it is long past time to confess something to the brother of whom he's been inseparable since birth. Jay, on the other hand, is counting the minutes until nightfall when the girl he can't stop thinking about promises she'll be there. and Kit has a couple of secrets of her own, including a guest she invited without consulting anyone. By midnight, the party will be completely out of control. By morning, the Riva mansion will have gone up in flames. But before that first spark in the early hours before dawn, the alcohol will flow, the music will play, and the loves and secrets that shape this family's generations will all come bubbling to the surface. Malibu Rising is a story about one unforgettable night in the life of a family. The night they each have to choose what they will keep from the people who made them and what they will leave behind. Now, yeah, that's what this book is about, but also not really. So the way, to me, this synopsis sounded was like, the house is going to go up in flames, something crazy is going to happen, and, chaos will ensue, and you're going to have to figure out, like, I thought it was going to be like a mystery sort of, or like they were going to tell you in the beginning that the house burns down, and then you kind of have to figure out throughout the story how it happened and who did it. But the house burning down part sort of ends up being this metaphor. And what this synopsis doesn't tell you is that throughout the story, it's mostly just a flashback to the story of this family and how these kids grew up and how they had a terrible childhood and how Mick Riva is a dick. Mick Riva, by the way, is in all of these Taylor Jenkins Reid books. She's in Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I hear she's in Daisy Jones and the Six. I don't know if she's in Carrie Soto's Back, but his kids are the main point of Malibu Rising. And you mostly just get the flashback of their lives. And I'm reading it. I'm more than halfway through. They're still talking about how these kids grew up. And I'm like, okay, well, where is this like massive fire going to come? Like, how is this house going to burn down? This is going to be crazy, And the house burning down really just ends up being a metaphor. Nina ends up going off at the end, and it's fire. It's like the way that she like finally lets loose is amazing because she's kind of reserved. So that was a really bright spot in the book. But overall, I feel like this book just promised to be a lot. And it kind of ended up being like nothing really happened in this book. I don't know if a lot of people agree with me on that. But it also probably didn't help that I read Malibu Rising before I read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because apparently like Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is kind of happens before that, but it also doesn't. It happens after as well. So there's really no series number to these. They do stand on their own, but it just wasn't my favorite book of the year, and I was kind of left disappointed by the end. And the more I sat on it, I was like, and then I read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I was like, this book is nothing compared to Seven Husbands. So, it just wasn't my favorite. I haven't read Daisy Jones and the Six, but I really want to. I was kind of holding back for a long time because of Malibu Rising. Then once I read Seven Husbands, I was like, okay, I need to read Daisy Jones and the Six. I need to. So I'm excited to see how that turns out for me. But yeah, Malibu Rising was just kind of not my favorite. That's that. But honestly, those were the only two like books that I didn't really like this year. I read so many that I loved. I branched out, into horror books, which I don't love, and romantic comedies, things that were kind of like campy, that were really just fun reads. And I just had a great time kind of expanding my horizons. And I'm really, really excited for all of the books that I'm going to read next year. The first two I already ordered, which is The Silent Patient and The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I think that's kind of a funny title considering the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, Seven Evelyn, it rhymes. So I'm very excited to read those. And I think I'm going to read The Perfect Marriage as well. But yeah, I'm just really grateful for all of the books that I've read. And I guess just my tip to anybody is, even after you read like a bad book, like don't regret it, because you you read an entire book. That's something to really be excited about and feel that accomplishment for. And yeah, I am so excited for this newfound passion of mine and, getting to talk about it on here. And, next year I will do one of these again, a best and worst books recap type of thing. So this has been really fun. I'm going to go ahead and end the episode here, but I thank you so much for listening. And please come back. I'm going to be posting videos every single week, doing all kinds of book reviews and talking all things reading. So thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.